the serene countryside of Montana, far from the big cities, surrounded by rolling hills that seemed to never end, lived a man named William Carter. At 52 years old, William was a simple farmer. His life was marked by long days, tiring routines, and a constant struggle to keep his small farm running, even when everything seemed to be going wrong. He always woke up before the sun, when the sky was still painted in deep shades of dark blue, and small stars blinked lazily about to disappear. The sound of the wind blowing through the trees, the distant song of the crickets, and that smell of wet earth after the early morning dew were part of his first moments of the day. His old wall clock, with its rhythmic ticking, filled the silence of the simple wooden house, a house that had seen better times, with peeling paint, creaking windows, and floorboards that complained with every step. Still, there was something comforting about that place, maybe because of the history, maybe because of the memories of happier times. William prepared his coffee slowly. His movements were almost automatic. Grinding the beans, heating the water, smelling that strong aroma that slowly spread through the kitchen, filling every corner of the house. That moment, alone, in silence, holding the hot mug in his hands, looking out the window, was one of the few things that still brought him peace. Outside, the landscape seemed unchanged. That old barn, a little crooked, the pasture that held out even with the drought of the last few months, and in the background, the mountains, always present, always imposing, like silent guardians of that small piece of the world. William took a deep breath, smelling the morning air as he watched the first lights of dawn timidly appear on the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange, pink, and gold, a living painting that he never tired of contemplating. But even with all this beauty, there was a weight on her chest, a constant worry that seemed to have no end. Bills piled up. Last winter was cruel. The crops did not yield as expected. The drought that summer only made things worse. William was in debt, and for the first time, he began to think that perhaps he could no longer sustain that life. Maybe he needed to sell the farm, that piece of land that had been in his family for 3 generations. Thinking about it made his heart clench. It was more than a house. It was a memory of his parents, his grandparents, of a lifetime of hard work, of roots planted in that soil. It was where he grew up, where he learned everything about planting, caring for animals, respecting nature and the cycles of life. He took out a small notebook, scribbled on, worn by time, where he wrote down all the debts, deadlines, payments, and every time he looked at those pages, it seemed like the weight on his shoulders got heavier. Still, there was a part of William that refused to give up. Something inside him, perhaps that stubborn old man he always was, insisted on continuing. After all, life has always been like this. Difficult, full of challenges, but also full of small joys, of simple moments that made it all worthwhile. The clock read 5:47 when he finished his coffee, put on his old straw hat, put on his worn boots, and set out for another day of work. The morning wind was gentle and cold, bringing with it the smell of the countryside, of damp grass grass, of the wood of the fences. William walked slowly to the barn. Each step was accompanied by the sound of his boots hitting the dirt floor. That sound, so simple, but so present in the life of those who live in the countryside. The sound of the day beginning, the sound of routine, the sound of hope disguised in the simple act of not stopping. He opened the barn door, which creaked as usual. Inside, the smell of hay, old wood, and used tools filled the air. He picked up his equipment, checked that everything was in place, and for a few moments he stood there, just listening to the silence. A silence that was not empty. It was filled with subtle sounds of insects, of the wind, of animals in the distance, of leaves moving gently. He then walked to the small vegetable garden at the back of the property. The plants were fighting bravely against the harsh weather that year. He looked at each one of them with the look of someone who understands, of someone who knows that sometimes nature also has its difficult days, but keeps moving forward. William took a deep breath. He looked out at the field, thinking about everything he needed to do. And even with the weight of his worries, there was a kind of peace in that moment. A peace that came from the simple fact of being there, alive, present, connected to that land. As he walked, his eyes were lost in the horizon. The sunlight was beginning to gently touch the hills, making the landscape come alive, colorful and bright. The sound of the birds was beginning to become more intense, as if they too were greeting the new day that was dawning. And it was then that, on that path that he had walked so many times, something caught his attention. It was just a reflection, a small gleam on the ground near the back fence, where the earth used to be drier, harder, more rocky. A golden dot so small that it would almost go unnoticed, were it not for the fact that that morning the sun was shining at exactly the right angle. William stopped. He frowned. He squinted, trying to understand what that glow was. He took a few steps towards it, with that mixture of curiosity and distrust that only those who live in the country know. He slowly bent down. With his hands, he pushed away some of the loose earth, and to his surprise, that golden dot didn't disappear. On the contrary, it seemed bigger, more intense, more real. But what? He muttered to himself, running his fingers over it. The texture was strange, cold, smooth, but with some irregularities. And the more he cleaned, the more he realized that this was no simple rock. It was no wet leaf reflecting the light. This was something different, something he had never seen before, something that somehow seemed impossible. His heart began to beat a little faster, but at the same time, his mind tried to remain calm. After all, it could just be an illusion, a random stone, a piece of old metal. Who knows? William stood up. He looked around as if to confirm that he was still in the same world as always, that this place had not suddenly transformed into something outside of reality. He took a deep breath, very deep. The smell of the morning, of the earth, of the trees, seemed more more intense now, more alive. And as he stared at that small patch of ground, a strange sensation began to take over his body, a mixture of calm with a premonition and intuition that was hard to describe. As if, at that very moment, something was starting to change. Something he could never have imagined. William remained still for a few seconds, crouched down, staring at that piece of ground. It was curious. That small glow seemed to hypnotize his eyes, as if time had suddenly slowed down, or simply stopped. He took another deep breath, slowly, trying to calm himself, trying to convince himself that this was probably just an optical illusion, maybe a piece of old glass, maybe a lost scrap of metal from some old machine that his grandparents had discarded decades ago. But even so, his hand was, almost by itself, digging a little deeper. His fingers, calloused and strong from hard work in the fields, glided easily through the damp morning earth, and then something unexpected. As he pulled out a bit more dirt, he realized that the golden glow wasn't just a single dot. In fact, it seemed to be expanding. It was as if it was connected to something bigger, much bigger. William held his breath. His heart began to race, a mixture of surprise, anxiety, and disbelief. With slow movements, almost as if he were in a trance, he pushed the earth further and further away, revealing a metallic, golden, irregular surface that seemed to stretch out to the sides, disappearing into the ground. His eyes widened. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope mixed with awe. No, it can't be, he whispered, almost voiceless. The silence around seemed more present than ever. Not even the birds sang at that moment. All that could be heard was the subtle sound of the wind passing through the leaves, like a distant whisper, and his own breathing. Slow, heavy, and at the same time full of expectation. William stood up slowly. His eyes scanned the surroundings, as if seeking confirmation that this was, in fact, happening, that he was not dreaming nor imagining things. He looked at the old barn, at the house in the distance, at the hills that had always been part of his horizon. Everything was exactly the same, and yet everything seemed different now. He bent down again. He picked up a small hoe, which was leaning against the fence, and carefully began to dig, not forcefully, not in a hurry, but with the delicacy of someone who realizes that maybe, just maybe, what is about to be revealed could be the most important thing that has ever happened in their entire life. Each piece of dirt removed made that golden thing seem bigger, more solid, more real. The edges were jagged, as if they were shaped by nature itself. The surface, despite having marks and small imperfections, reflected the sunlight with an intense, warm, almost hypnotic shine. It isn't possible, he repeated to himself, shaking his head, trying, without success, to find some logical explanation. Then when he moved a little further away from the ground, he realized that the object was not flat. It had volume. It had weight. And for an instant, he felt a chill run down his spine. The kind of chill that comes when something very, very out of the ordinary is about to happen. He took a deep breath. Softly. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, trying to concentrate, to calm the thoughts that were starting to shoot in all directions. And then, very carefully, he held that object, and to his surprise, it came loose from the ground with relative ease, as if it had been waiting for a long, long time to be found. As he held it, he immediately felt the weight, a weight that didn't seem compatible with the size. It was dense, compact, solid. He raised it slowly to eye level, and as the sunlight touched its surface, there was no longer any doubt. It was gold, a nugget of gold, giant, bigger than anything he had ever seen or even imagined. For a few seconds, he stood completely still, staring, contemplating, trying to process what his eyes were seeing and what his hands were holding. The silence seemed absolute. There was only him, the sound of his breathing, and that golden glow that now seemed to have a life of its own. "My God," he whispered, almost voiceless. His hands were shaking, but not from fear, but from disbelief. This was real. He looked around once more, as if he expected that at any moment someone would appear and say that it was all a prank, an illusion, a dream. But no, I was alone, and everything there was real. He held the nugget against his chest, taking a deep breath, feeling the cold of the metal seep through his shirt, contrasting with the morning heat that was beginning to intensify. He walked slowly back to the barn, holding that treasure with both hands, as if holding something sacred, something that could not, under any circumstances, be dropped. When he arrived at the barn, he placed the nugget on an old wooden table, which creaked under the weight, but held. He sat on a bench, staring at her. His eyes roamed over every detail, every curve, every imperfection, every crack in the golden surface. What did that mean? What would you do now? For a few minutes he stayed there, in silence, just breathing, looking, and trying to understand how life, in such a mysterious way, could from one moment to the next change so radically. He thought about his family, about his grandfather, who always said that this land was special, that there was something magical about it, although until that moment it had never been more than old stories, tales from old country folk. He remembered his father, who worked until the last days of his life, always fighting to keep the farm alive, always believing that things would get better even when everything seemed to go wrong. And now, looking at that nugget, William wondered, was this the sign? Was this the reward for all these years of struggle? Or was it just an accident of fate, a stroke of luck, an unexpected gift from life? He took another deep breath, really deep, smelling the barn, the wood, the hay, the years and years of history embedded in those walls. He ran his hands over his face, trying to calm himself down, trying to organize his thoughts. And then, as if something inside him had been ignited, William smiled. A shy, somewhat suspicious smile, but full of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. He got up, took an old cloth, and began to carefully clean the nugget, removing the excess soil and revealing little by little all its golden shine. It was beautiful, stunning, mesmerizing. As he did this, his mind slowly began to imagine possibilities. What would he do now? Would he sell it? Would he keep it? Would he tell someone? Or would he keep it a secret? For a few minutes, he let his imagination carry him away, imagining his life changing, debts being paid, perhaps a new house, a renovated barn, who knows, even traveling, seeing the sea, something he had always dreamed of, but could never achieve. And as he imagined all this, he realized that for the first time in many years, his chest felt light, his breathing was calm, his body relaxed. It was as if, finally, the universe was somehow saying to him, "It's okay now, William. You can rest. You deserve it." And in that cozy silence of the barn, with the soft sound of the wind passing outside, William closed his eyes for a few moments, just to breathe, just to feel, just to rest, without knowing that this was just the beginning of a much, much bigger transformation. The wind blew gently, rustling the leaves on the trees around the farm, while William sat on the old bench in the barn, staring at that nugget of gold, as if he were still trying to believe that it was all real. The silence was almost absolute. The sound of the wind mixed with the distant singing of some birds created a soft, peaceful melody that seemed to lull their thoughts, taking them far, far away, to a place where everything finally made sense. His fingers glided slowly over the surface of the gold. The cold, smooth texture, with its small irregularities, seemed to somehow transmit a strange energy, a mixture of something very ancient, powerful, mysterious. For a few minutes, he simply stood there, in silence, breathing deeply, smelling the wood, the hay, the earth, and that metal that, until then, had only been part of stories, films, or the most distant dreams. And as he observed every detail of the nugget, his mind began to be invaded by a flood of thoughts, doubts, fears, and of course, a hint of excitement. "What do I do now?" he whispered to himself in a barely audible tone. On the one hand, I felt an almost uncontrollable urge to run to the city, show it to someone, confirm once and for all if it really was gold and how much it was worth. But on the other hand, an inner voice, more cautious, older, more experienced, told him to be calm. Very calm. "Not everyone needs to know this, William," said that voice inside him, with a tone that curiously reminded him of the advice his grandfather had given him, which he used to repeat: "When life gives you something precious, silence is the first gift you must offer in return." And it made sense. In that small town, news traveled fast. Too fast. And not everyone would be happy to know that William Carter, that old, broke, discredited farmer, had now perhaps found a fortune buried in his own backyard. His eyes returned to the nugget. The golden glow seemed more intense now, reflecting the rays of sunlight that entered discreetly through the cracks in the barn wall. William took a deep breath, slowly, closed his eyes for a few seconds, and let his mind wander. He imagined himself arriving at the city bank, presenting that nugget to the manager. The expressions of surprise, the suspicious looks, the questions, and then, inevitably, the entire city commenting. Comments that would quickly turn into assumptions, into judgments, into envy. Did he find more? Some would say. He must be hiding something. Others would say. Why him? They would ask, with that tone that mixes curiosity with spite. He slowly opened his eyes, looking again at that piece of gold that now seemed to weigh more than ever. Not just physically, but emotionally as well. I need to think. Calmly, without rushing, he said in a low voice, almost as if he were remembering to breathe. He looked out the barn window. The morning light was already growing brighter, indicating that the hours were passing. Outside, life went on as usual. The cows grazed in the fields. The birds flew back and forth. The wind ruffled the leaves as if nothing had changed. But for William, everything had changed. He stood up and walked slowly to an old cupboard in the back of the barn where he kept some old tools. He opened the door carefully, and there, in the lower corner, he found a small, sturdy wooden box that belonged to his father. It was a box that, since he was a child, he knew contained documents, memories, and important family things. He picked it up, blew off the accumulated dust, and slowly opened it. Inside, among some old photos, there was a small piece of dark velvet fabric, folded. He unfolded it carefully and instinctively placed the nugget on that fabric, then closed the box. For some reason, that made sense, keeping it that way, protected, out of sight, as if that gold needed to remain a secret for now. He held the box against his chest, took a deep breath, and then walked slowly into the house. Upon entering, everything seemed quieter than ever, maybe because now that silence had a different weight. It wasn't just the sound of loneliness, it was the sound of mystery, of responsibility, and of the endless possibilities that were now in William's hands. He placed the box on the kitchen table. He sat down on the wooden chair, stared at it, and for a few minutes he simply stood there, doing nothing, just feeling the moment. And then, as if something inside him pulled him back to reality, he got up, went to the shelf where he kept some old books, took a notebook, a pen, and began to take notes. First, he listed the possibilities. What to do. Take the nugget for evaluation. Keep absolute secrecy. Search alone if there was more gold on the property. Sell the farm before they find out, or simply do nothing for now. Then he listed his fears. What could go wrong? People discover and invade your land. The government gets involved. Laws he didn't know about mining. Fake people approaching. The city itself, which had always seen him as the loser of the region, began to treat him differently, not because of who he was, but because of what he now had. And finally, he wrote down what, in the end, was the most important thing. What did he really want? Peace, tranquility, get out of debt, living a simple life, but this time without the constant weight of lack, worry, insecurity. He closed the notebook. He left it on the table. He crossed his arms, resting them on the worn wood, and slowly rested his head there for a few minutes, or maybe hours. He simply stayed like that, listening to his own breathing, the sound of the wind, the soft creaking of the walls of the house, and that silence that strangely now seemed so comfortable. "It's okay now, William," a soft voice said inside his mind. "You can rest. You deserve it. You don't need to worry anymore. Everything will be okay." And little by little, his eyes began to close. His breathing calmed. His muscles, previously tense, now relaxed. Deeply, as if for the first time in many years, he could finally allow himself to simply rest. And while the world outside continued its rhythm, William fell asleep there at the old kitchen table with a slight smile on his face and a heart, for the first time in a long time, truly at peace. The sun was already beginning to move slowly, casting warm rays through the windows of the old wooden house. The soft light danced across the walls, casting shadows that moved slowly, following the calm rhythm of the morning in the Montana countryside. Slowly, William's eyes opened. For a few seconds, he stood there, still, just listening. The sound of the wind passing through the trees, the bird song in the distance, and that welcoming silence that filled every corner of the house. He slowly raised his head, realizing that at some point he had fallen asleep on the kitchen table, with his arms crossed and the wooden box still in front of him. For a brief moment, he felt that natural confusion of someone who wakes up without knowing exactly where they are, or if everything they experienced before falling asleep was real, or just a dream. His eyes immediately turned to the box. His fingers glided gently over the worn wood, feeling every groove, every mark of time, as if seeking through touch a silent confirmation that all this was really happening. He took a deep breath, really deep, and very carefully opened the lid. There she was, to Nugget, shining in the golden morning light as if made of the very essence of the sun. So real, so present, so impossible, and yet so absolutely concrete. For a few moments, William just stared, not thinking, not questioning, just contemplating. It was curious how something so simple, so small in relation to the world, could carry so much meaning. It wasn't just a stone. It wasn't just gold. It was, in some way, the materialization of something much greater, a promise, an answer, maybe even a miracle. He stood up slowly, took the nugget in his hands, and for the first time since he had found it, took it to the living room window. Sunlight filtered through the metal, creating reflections that danced on the walls, the floor, and William's own face. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, breathing deeply, allowing himself once again to feel, absorb, connect with that moment. And in that instant, something inside him changed. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't just about getting out of debt anymore. It was about something bigger, something that, until then, he couldn't name, but that he knew deep down was deeply true. He went back to the kitchen, put the nugget back in the box, closed it carefully, and after a few minutes of silence, made a decision. He grabbed his hat, put on his worn jacket, pulled on his boots, and left. The morning wind was fresh, gentle, and carried that unmistakable scent of the earth, the trees, the fields wet with dew. He walked to the barn, grabbed a shovel, a pickaxe, and a flashlight. He looked around, making sure no one was around. Although on this isolated patch of land, it was unlikely anyone would pass by without him noticing. With firm steps, he walked towards the place where he found the nugget. Each step seemed to have a different weight now, an intention, a silent hope, mixed with a curiosity that bordered on the sacred. Once there, he looked carefully at the ground. The small hole he had dug the day before was still there, like a portal to something bigger, something that was perhaps just beginning to reveal itself. He took a deep breath, grabbed the shovel, and with slow movements began to dig. Each time the blade of the shovel met the earth, there was that soft sound, rhythmic, almost hypnotic, as if the earth itself was responding, welcoming, allowing. He dug without haste, without anxiety, just present. Each movement was followed by a pause, by a watchful eye, by a deep breath, the smell of wet earth, the sound of birds, the gentle warmth of the sun beating down on our backs. Everything seemed to be part of a perfect choreography, designed exclusively for that moment. And as the earth opened up, something inside William opened up too. As if with each shovelful of dirt he removed, he was also removing layers of fear, of insecurity, of doubt. For more than an hour, he continued like this, digging, observing, listening, until something, a different sound, the sound of a shovel hitting something hard, solid, metallic, he stopped. He remained still for a few seconds. His heart raced, but at the same time, a strange calm took over his body. He slowly bent down and began to remove the soil with his hands very carefully, until little by little a golden surface began to appear, timid, hidden, but without a doubt present. His eyes widened, his hands were shaking, but not from fear, from something he couldn't quite name, maybe reverence. He continued cleaning until there, before his eyes, another nugget appeared, smaller than the first one, but still impressive. He took it in his hands. He felt the weight, the texture, the cold of the metal. My God, he whispered, almost voiceless. he looked up at the sky, as if searching for an answer, as if he wanted to understand. How? Why? Now? After so many years? He took a deep breath, very deep, feeling every cell in his body fill with that pure, light air, full of life, full of possibilities. And in that moment, he understood something. It wasn't just luck. It was no coincidence. It was, in some way, that he still couldn't understand, life giving him back everything that for so long had been denied to him. These tears began to fall, silently, discreetly, not of sadness, but of a gratitude so deep, so intense, that it could not be put into words. He sat on the edge of the hole, holding that second nugget in his hands, looking at it as if he were looking at an old friend, or who knows, at a promise that was finally being fulfilled. The wind blew, rustling the leaves. The sun shone, warming the skin, and for a few minutes, William just stood there, in silence, breathing, feeling, existing, and for the first time in many years, he was absolutely certain that everything, absolutely everything, was finally starting to make sense. For a few moments, William sat there, on the edge of that hole, holding the new gold nugget in his hands, staring at it as if that small golden object was a key to all of life's mysteries. The sun rose slowly, spreading a golden light over the hills, making the leaves shine softly. The wind blew with that serene sound, that sound that only those who live in the countryside know. A natural, perfect melody that lulls the thoughts, that calms the body, that brings peace. He breathed deeply, filling his lungs with that pure air, fresh, loaded with subtle scents of nature, of wet earth, dry wood, distant hay, of the countryside simply. His fingers glided slowly over the surface of the nugget. The cold of the metal seemed to somehow balance the heat that now took over his chest. A heat that didn't come from the sun, nor from effort, but from within. A heat that had a name, hope, and it was curious to realize how, in such a short time, everything seemed different. The farm, which had always been synonymous with struggle, with difficulty, now seemed magical, enchanted, alive in a way he had never felt before. William looked up at the sky. The clouds moved slowly, drawing shapes that he observed as when he was a child lying on the grass, dreaming of things that, at the time, seemed so distant, almost impossible. And he thought about everything, about his life, about the choices he made, about the times he thought about giving up, and mainly about the times when, even without knowing exactly why, he chose to continue. He chose to resist. He chose to remain. Life has always had a curious way of testing your resistance. Years and years of crops that didn't yield. Harsh winters that destroyed any hope. Debts, bills, sleepless nights, trying to figure out how to solve the impossible. But even so, even when everything seemed lost, something inside him always insisted on believing. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was faith, or who knows, a little of both. And now, looking at that nugget, feeling its weight, its texture, its cold, I understood that perhaps the universe had, indeed, a very unique way of rewarding those who choose to simply not give up. The sound of the wind, the smell of the earth, the gentle warmth of the sun, everything seemed more intense, more alive, more present, and in that silence that only the countryside can offer, William allowed himself something he hadn't done for a long time, to be completely present, without thinking about what would come, without worrying about what should be done, without calculating, without planning, just being, feeling the grass touching your hands, hear the distant sound of a bird, perhaps a crow, perhaps a hawk, flying over the hills, smell the wood of the old barn, mixed with the faint scent of wildflowers growing on the edges of the pasture. For a few minutes, perhaps many, he lost himself in this almost meditative state where time seemed to not exist, where there was only the now, and in that now, everything was in perfect harmony. No debt, no worries, no anguish, just peace. A peace so deep, so real, so absolute, that it seemed to fill every cell of his body, every space of his mind, every corner of his soul. And as he looked at that nugget, he realized that it was not simply a material wealth. It was, above all, a symbol, a silent message from life, from destiny, from the universe, that things can indeed change, that sometimes when everything seems lost, it is precisely when something great is about to happen. William closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, a very deep breath, and as he let it out, he felt a lightness he hadn't felt in years. It's all right now, he whispered to himself. You can just rest. He stayed like that for long minutes. His body relaxed, his mind calm, his heart for the first time in a long time beating in a serene rhythm, light, soft, like the swaying of leaves in the wind, like the sound of water running in a stream, like the comfortable silence of a morning in the countryside. And in that moment, he realized that regardless of what he did from then on, his life had already changed, because more than gold, more than any material wealth, he had rediscovered something infinitely more valuable, the ability to feel at peace with himself. He looked around, the hills, the pasture, the old barn, the house in the distance. Everything seemed more beautiful, as if now I saw it for the first time, as if somehow that place, which for so many years had been a source of concern, was now simply a home full of history, of memories, of life. He took the nugget to his jacket pocket, stood up, wiped his hands on his pants, took a deep breath, and with slow steps began to walk back home. The sound of your footsteps on the grass, the rustling of the leaves, the singing of the birds, everything seemed like a perfect symphony, composed especially for that moment. And as he walked, he felt every muscle in his body relax, every heavy thought dissipate, like clouds slowly dissipating in the sky. When he got home, he went in, placed the nugget next to the first one inside the wooden box, and for a few minutes he just looked, observing, feeling, and then he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He made some coffee. Slowly, he ground the grains. He heated the water. He felt that strong, welcoming smell spread through the kitchen, filling every corner of the house, bringing a feeling of comfort, of warmth, of home. He sat at the table, holding the warm mug in his hands, looked out the window, and for the first time in many, many years, simply smiled. A light smile, sincere, true. A smile from someone who finally understands that sometimes, when we least expect it, life surprises us in ways we could never imagine. And as he drank his coffee, he felt his eyes begin to feel heavy. His breathing became slower and slower, softer, deeper. The body relaxed, as if now, finally, it could allow itself to rest, to allow itself simply to fall asleep in peace, knowing that everything, absolutely everything, was finally okay. As he held the hot mug, William let his eyes wander out the kitchen window. The steam rose slowly, dancing in the air, forming soft spirals that blended with the golden morning light. Outside, the scenery seemed almost still, the hills in the background outlined by the soft contour of the horizon, the green pasture dotted with small wildflowers, and further ahead, the old fence that, although crooked, still delimited that piece of the world he called home. Every detail, every sound, every smell, everything seemed more vivid, more present, as if somehow that morning had a special glow, a different energy, almost magical. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with that scent that mixed coffee, old wood, and wet earth, and for a moment he closed his eyes, allowing his memories to take him back in time. He remembered his father, sitting at that exact same table, looking out the exact same window, holding a mug just like the one now in his hands. She remembered the conversations they had, the simple but wise advice, the stories he told about the hard times, about how, even in the worst storms, there is always a morning after. Life in the countryside is like that, son, his father would say. Sometimes you plant and don't harvest. Other times you don't even expect it, and the land gives you more than you imagined. But in the end, everything works out. Life always finds a way. And now, looking at the wooden box on the table, with those 2 gold nuggets inside, William understood, perhaps for the first time, the true meaning of those words. It was as if the universe, life, or whoever was in charge of everything was finally showing him that, yes, sometimes when you least expect it, life gives you more than you imagined. He smiled, a calm smile, sincere, full of a silent gratitude that needed no words or explanations. With each sip of coffee, he felt his body relax more, his breathing slow down, his muscles, previously tense, now loosened, as if finally they could simply rest. He looked at the box again, that thing there, That gold was much more than money. It was, above all, a symbol, a reminder that even when everything seems lost, the unexpected can indeed happen. For a few minutes, he just stared, observed, allowed himself to feel, allowed himself to be completely present, and then slowly his mind began to wander. He began to imagine the possibilities, not anxiously, not with that desperate rush that had dominated his thoughts for so long, but in a serene, calm way, like someone watching the river flow, knowing that it always finds its way. Maybe he could renovate the house, fix the roof that had been threatening to collapse for years. Maybe he could buy new machinery, make the work on the farm easier, plant more, take better care of the land, or maybe, just maybe, I could, for the first time in my life, simply rest, travel, see the sea, discover places that until then only existed in distant dreams. But at the same time, a part of him whispered that that gold, that unexpected gift, also came with a responsibility, not just with himself, but with his history, with his family, with that land, which for generations has sustained his people. This land gave you this, William, whispered that inner voice, soft, serene. Now, perhaps it is time to give back. And as he thought about it, he realized that deep down he already knew the answer. I already knew what to do. It wasn't about selling everything and leaving. It wasn't about running away. It wasn't about hiding. It was about honor, honoring his history, honoring his family, honoring that land that even in the worst times never stopped offering him shelter, sustenance, and now, hope. He took a deep breath, very deep, and when he let it out, he felt a lightness so great, so profound, that it seemed impossible to describe. He got up, walked over to the bookshelf, picked up an old photo album, blew off the accumulated dust, and slowly began to leaf through it. Each photo, a memory, a life, a piece of history. There was his grandfather holding a hoe, smiling, wearing that worn-out hat that William still kept in his room. There was his grandmother in front of the house, holding a basket full of tomatoes picked from the garden. There was his father, still young, carrying bales of hay, with that determined look in his eyes. The same look that William now saw reflected in the mirror. And as he looked at those photos, he realized he wasn't alone. He never had been, because somehow every inch of that land, every tree, every rock, every corner of that farm carried their presence, their energy, their story. He closed the album. He put it back on the shelf, and for a few minutes he simply stood there, in silence, looking out the window, feeling the wind touch his face, listening to the soft sound of the leaves rustling, allowing himself once again to just be. "It's okay now, William," he whispered to himself. "You can finally rest." And as the world outside continued its course with its natural serenity, William felt his eyes begin to grow heavy, his breathing becoming slower, deeper, His muscles relaxed, his body light, almost floating, his mind silent like the clear sky of a summer morning, and so, wrapped in the welcoming silence of his own story, William allowed himself to simply close his eyes and once again fall asleep, knowing that now everything, absolutely everything, was finally at peace. The morning breeze continued to blow gently across the hills, ruffling the leaves on the trees, making them dance slowly as if following the calm rhythm of William's thoughts. He woke up slowly, without rushing, feeling that strange and at the same time deeply comfortable peace that seemed to fill every corner of the house. His eyes took a few seconds to open completely, as if his body wanted to enjoy a little more of that state of lightness, that feeling that for the first time in a long time, everything was simply okay. He sat up in bed, ran his hands over his face, took a deep breath, a very deep breath, and as the air entered, he felt his lungs fill with that smell he knew so well, the smell of wood, of old coffee, of damp earth, and of fresh wind. For a few seconds, he just stood there, breathing, feeling, listening to the silence. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was a silence filled with subtle sounds, the singing of birds, the rustling of leaves, the distant sound of a stream running far below, hidden among the rocks. William's gaze turned, almost automatically, to the wooden box on the table, still open, where the 2 gold nuggets lay side by side, discreetly reflecting the soft light that entered through the window. And once again that mixture of disbelief and gratitude filled his chest. It was real. It was there. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't imagination. This was, in fact, happening. He got up slowly, walked to the kitchen, put water on to boil, picked up the old coffee grinder, poured in the beans, turned the handle slowly, listening to that familiar sound that somehow seemed even more comforting that day. As the strong aroma began to spread throughout the room, his eyes wandered out the window. Outside, the world looked the same, and yet completely different. The old barn, with its crooked boards, the fence half fallen, that I had been promising to fix for years, the pasture which, despite everything, remained green, resilient, stubborn, like itself. And then, as he looked out over that patch of world that for generations had been all his family had ever known, something inside him began to stir, a simple, direct question that I could no longer ignore. Is there more, not in a greedy way, not with that blind desire of someone who wants everything at any cost, but with an almost innocent curiosity, almost childlike, of someone who, upon finding a treasure, wonders if, perhaps, the universe still has a few more surprises in store. He prepared the coffee, poured it into the mug, held it between his hands, feeling the heat spread through his fingers, up his arms, also warming his chest, his heart, his thoughts. And as he took the first sip, he made his decision. I need to know. I couldn't just ignore it. I couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. That land, that patch of ground, that for so long had seemed to offer nothing but hardship, suddenly was showing itself to be generous, abundant, surprising, and he needed to understand. He needed to at least try. He finished his coffee, put on his hat, put on his boots, put on his worn jacket, and left. The wind blew in my face, cold, clean, full of smells that only those who live in the countryside can recognize. The smell of damp grass, of old wood, of freshly turned earth. He walked to the barn, picked up the shovel, the pickaxe, the flashlight, and a bag of tools that until then had been forgotten in a corner, dusty, almost unused. His steps were firm but calm. Every sound, the crackling of dry twigs beneath his boots, the rustling of leaves, the distant crowing of a rooster, seemed to be part of a soundtrack made especially for that moment. And when he reached the same spot where, days before, he had found the 2 nuggets, he stopped. He looked around. He took a deep breath. That place, so simple, so ordinary, now seemed loaded with meaning, with mystery, with possibilities. He bent down. He looked at the ground. He noticed small cracks in the earth, places where the soil seemed different, sandier, looser. And then, with slow, almost ceremonial movements, he began to dig. Each shovelful of earth removed seemed to bring with it pieces of his own story, fragments of an entire life dedicated to that piece of land, a life of hard work, of sacrifices, of challenges, but now also of rewards. The sound of the shovel meeting the earth, that rhythmic, constant, hypnotic sound, filled his ears, mixing with the slow, deep breathing he was doing, almost without realizing it. He dug without haste, without anxiety, just present, connected with every detail, with every smell, with every sound. And as the hole grew deeper, something inside him also opened up. As if, along with each shovel of dirt, he was also removing layers of insecurity, of fear, of doubt. For long minutes, perhaps hours, he continued like that. Focused, silent, attentive, until again that sound. Touch, the unmistakable sound of something solid, metallic, hidden beneath the earth. Her heart raced. Her hands, once steady, now trembled. Not with fear, not with anxiety, but with that strange, almost sacred mixture of surprise, hope, and reverence. He bent down and began to remove the soil with his hands, carefully, very carefully, until little by little a golden glow began to emerge. First, small, then bigger, bigger, until suddenly he realized there, before his eyes, was not a nugget, but an entire cluster of gold trapped between rocks, earth, roots. William stood still for long seconds. He couldn't even breathe. Just look. Just feel. The silence around seemed absolute. The wind, which had been blowing before, now seemed to have stopped. The birds, which were singing, now fell silent, as if somehow they also respected that moment. And in that moment, William understood once and for all. That was real. That was happening. And in in some way that he could perhaps never fully understand that piece of land which for so long had offered him only resistance now gave it back to him with interest, with gratitude, with generosity. He took a deep breath, very deep, and as he let out his breath, he allowed a smile to appear, light, serene, full of that peace that only someone who, one day, almost lost everything, and suddenly realizes that life can still surprise, can feel, and as he looked at that gold, reflecting the sunlight that was now shining brighter, he allowed himself to think once again, maybe, just maybe. Life always knew exactly what it was doing. William stood there, motionless, for long minutes. Perhaps many, perhaps few. Time seemed to no longer exist. Everything around him seemed suspended. The wind, once constant, now seemed to have stopped just so that that moment could exist in complete peace. His hands, still covered in dirt, held that cluster of gold with a care that bordered on the sacred. His fingers slowly traced every curve, every indentation, every small imperfection of that object that so improbable seemed almost unreal, and at the same time, absolutely, profoundly real. The golden glow reflected the sun that was now breaking through the clouds, illuminating the field in an almost poetic way. It was as if nature itself was smiling at him. William took a deep breath, deeply, allowing the fresh, clean, pure air to fill his lungs, calm his thoughts, slow his heart, and bring him back to that present moment. And as he breathed, he realized a silent but powerful truth was beginning to form within him. That land, that farm, was never just land. She carried history. She carried memories. She carried secrets. And now she also carried miracles. He looked around. The old barn, which, although crooked, was still standing. The fence, half fallen, which had withstood the test of time. The gentle hills, outlined against the horizon, green, peaceful, eternal. It was all there. It had always been there. He just never noticed, never imagined, never dared to believe that something like this could be hidden silently beneath his very feet, waiting, just waiting for the right moment to be found. And perhaps that was just it. Perhaps life has its own plans, its own rhythms, its own ways, mysterious, silent, surprising, of delivering what it has kept for so long. William smiled, a serene smile, full of peace, of gratitude, of reverence, and in that welcoming silence, he realized that there was no more room for fear, nor for doubt, nor for insecurity. Life was finally telling him, with all the words that didn't need to be said, that everything was okay now. He carefully placed the piece of gold inside the cloth bag he had brought. He closed it carefully, as if he were guarding something precious, not only for its material value, but for its meaning, its history, its symbolism. He stood up slowly, taking a deep breath, observing the sky that was now beginning to open up even more, allowing the sun's rays to bathe the entire field. The smell of the morning, of the damp grass, of the freshly turned earth, of the clean wind, presence, more present, more alive, and as he walked back home, his steps were calm, slow, as if each of them wanted to. Also give thanks, also celebrate, also say goodbye to that old version of himself that, until that day, believed that life was just struggle, just resistance, just survival. No, life could indeed be more. It could be light, surprising, generous. When he arrived home, he pushed open the wooden door, which creaked softly as it always did. The smell of coffee, still present in the air, now mixed with the smell of earth and wind, creating a combination he would never forget. He placed the bag on the table. He opened it slowly, and for a few minutes he just observed, looking, feeling. Before him now were 3 pieces of gold, 3 pieces of a new reality, 3 pieces of a new life. And as he looked, he realized that, more than gold, it was actually time to live, time to rest, time to make peace with one's own history, time to finally live without the constant weight of scarcity, worry, anxiety. William took a deep breath, really deep, and as the air slowly entered his lungs, he felt, almost physically, every bit of tension, of fear, of anguish simply dissolving. He let out his breath slowly, very slowly, and along with it, he also let go of the past. He let go of the sleepless nights. He let go of the weight of the bills. He let go of the years of struggle, of resistance, of survival, and it became light, lighter than it had been in a long, long time. He got up, went to the stove, put more water on to boil, and ground more coffee. Each movement was made with an almost ritualistic calm, as if somehow the coffee he was now preparing was not just a drink, but a celebration, a silent toast to everything that was now part of his life. The scent spread again, filling every corner of the house, bringing that warmth, that comfort, that certainty of home. While he waited for the water to boil, he went to the bookshelf, picked up the photo album again, opened it to any page, and smiled. There he was once again, his father, smiling, holding a hoe, firm gaze, the posture of someone who, despite everything, always believed, always remained, always resisted. William slowly ran his fingers over that photo, as if somehow he could, through touch, connect with that energy, that presence, that force. "Father," he whispered in a barely audible tone. "Life, finally, heard me." And in that moment, something inside him lit up. A flame, a decision, a certainty. From then on, his life would no longer be guided by lack, by fear, by necessity. From then on, his life would simply be guided by abundance, for gratitude, for generosity, for love. And as he poured the coffee into the mug, walked back to the table, looked once more at that gold before him, and allowed himself to simply smile. A calm smile, tranquil, sincere. A smile from someone who finally understands that sometimes life takes time, But when it arrives, and it arrives to transform everything. Time seemed to have slowed down, or perhaps it was just William who, for the first time in many, many years, was allowing himself to perceive the passage of time differently. Not like that old enemy who always ran too fast, who brought deadlines, bills, worries, but like in Jesu, old friend, gentle, serene, who just moves softly, calmly, slowly drawing the contours of life. He was sitting in the rocking chair on the porch of the house. The warm mug of coffee rested in his hands. The wind blew slowly, bringing the smell of cut grass, trees, aged wood, damp earth, and silence. That silence. But it wasn't an empty silence. No, it was a silence full of life. The sound of leaves gently swaying, the bird song in the distance, the sound of some insect buzzing lazily, deep down, almost imperceptible, and further away, the rhythmic sound of the stream hidden between the rocks. Everything there was peace. William looked at the horizon. The hills, with their gentle contours, now seemed even greener, more alive. The sky, a deep blue, almost cloudless, contrasted with the golden light that was beginning to prepare for dusk. And as he rocked slowly in his chair, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Lightness, that weight, that constant knot in his chest, that silent tightness that for years had accompanied him, never going away, now simply didn't exist anymore. It was strange, in a way, almost disconcerting, living so many years believing that life was, essentially, about struggle, resistance, survival, and suddenly discovering that sometimes life also knows how to be generous. That sometimes the universe does conspire in your favor. That not everything needs to be difficult. That sometimes the miracle simply lies in persistence, in the silent choice to continue, day after day, even when everything seems to say no. His eyes instinctively turned to the table next to him, where inside the wooden box 3 gold nuggets now lay. 3 pieces of something that, until a few days ago, he never imagined could exist. And looking at them, he realized that it wasn't just gold. No, that was time. It was freedom. It was healing. It was, above all, proof that it was all worth it. William closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, a very deep breath, and as he let it out, he felt his entire body relax. Every muscle, every thought, every space in his mind, as if finally he could allow himself to simply exist. No charges, no fear, no rush, just being, just live. He let his thoughts wander freely, without direction, without haste. He remembered his childhood, the days when he would run barefoot through that same pasture, imagining he was an explorer or a hero from some film he watched on the television in the living room. He remembered the rainy days when he would look out the window, listening to the sound of the drops hitting the roof, while his mother prepared cake and coffee, and the house would be filled with that sweet, welcoming smell, which seemed in itself to embrace. He remembered his father, always serious, always determined, but who, from time to time, would let out that shy smile, that look that said, without words, how much he loved that land, that life, that family. And as he remembered, he realized that, in a way, they were all there. They always have been on the wood of the balcony, in the smell of the earth, in the sound of the wind, in the very breath he was now taking, slow, deep, full of peace. And in that moment he realized something even bigger. That real gold was always there, in memory, in history, on earth, in life. The nuggets were, indeed, a blessing, a gift, a miracle, but the true wealth, the one that nothing and no one could take away, was this: silence, peace, gratitude, the certainty that despite everything, life always took care of him, even when it seemed like it wasn't, even when the weight seemed too much, even when everything indicated that there would be no way out. Life, silently, wove its own plans, their own ways, mysterious, unexpected, surprising, of making everything in the end fit together. The wind blew a little stronger, the leaves swayed, the clouds slowly began to change color, announcing that the day was beginning to gently say goodbye. William opened his eyes. He smiled, and once again he whispered, just to himself, just to that wind that seemed to hear, "It's all right now. Everything is fine. I can just rest." And while the world followed its course, with its silent beauty, with its poetry that lives in simple things, William remained there, in the rocking chair, looking at the horizon, breathing, feeling, existing, knowing deep in my chest with a certainty that no words would be able to describe, that now everything, absolutely everything, was at peace. The sun was slowly beginning to set behind the hills, painting the sky with shades of orange, pink, and gold. The clouds, which were previously white and almost even imperceptible in the easy blue sky, now looked like an artist's brushstrokes, drawing soft, peaceful shapes, as if they also wanted to participate in that moment of silence and contemplation. William remained in the rocking chair, watching everything, breathing, feeling. The wind was blowing cooler now, bringing that characteristic smell of late afternoon in the countryside, a mixture of damp grass, sun-warmed wood, and that almost sweet scent that came from the wildflowers scattered along the edges of the pasture. The sound of the stream, more intense now, seemed like a melody that lulled his thoughts, and for the first time he realized that the sound had always been there. It had always been a part of his life. It had always been his companion, even though for so long he hadn't really stopped to listen. Because the truth is, for years, the sound of fear, worry, anxiety has always been louder. But now, everything was different. That weight, that constant pressure, it just wasn't there anymore. William took a deep breath, softly, deeply. Each breath seemed to cleanse not only the lungs, but also the mind, the soul, as if with each intake of air, something old was leaving, and something new, light, serene, took its place. His eyes scanned the horizon. The mountains in the distance were now just blue shadows, outlined against the golden sky. The trees swayed slowly, as if waving silently, acknowledging this moment of peace, of transformation, of gratitude, and as he watched, his mind calmly began to wander. He began to remember the years he had spent there, the good days, the bad days, the smiles, the tears, the cold mornings when he would wake up before the sun even rose, just to make sure that somehow the bills would be paid. He remembered the years when, alone, he would fix the fence, plant, harvest, and at the end of the day, he would sit right there on that same porch, trying to find, in the colors of the sunset, some sign that everything would be okay. And now, that sign was there. Not on the horizon, not in the clouds, not in the wind, but inside it, in the peace that finally took up residence in his chest, in the certainty that life, with all its unpredictability, its beauty, its poetry, always knew exactly what it was doing. He looked at the box on the table. The lid was open, revealing the golden glow of the 3 nuggets, which now reflected the colors of the sunset, taking on even more magical, even more surreal tones. And looking at them, he realized that gold, as valuable as it was not by far his greatest wealth, because true wealth was in that moment, in that silence, in that slow, deep breath which filled his entire body with a sensation that he, until then, didn't know was possible to feel. A lightness, a serenity, a welcome. It was as if the universe itself was telling him, "You've arrived, William. You've arrived where you always wanted to be, where you always deserved to be, where in fact you've always been, even without realizing, is here, now, present, alive, at peace." He closed his eyes. He let the wind touch his face, mess up his hair, slide over his skin, like an invisible hug, full of love, care, life. And as he breathed, he allowed every sound, every smell, every sensation to enter, to fill, to heal, to transform. The sound of leaves, the smell of the earth, the gentle warmth of the sun saying goodbye, the slight chill that began to announce the arrival of night. It was all part of it. Everything was simply perfect. For a few minutes, or perhaps hours, it remained like that, without thinking about tomorrow, without thinking about what I would do, what I would decide, what I would choose. Because at that moment, none of that mattered. There was only now, and now was everything. Slowly, he opened his eyes. The sky was now beginning to darken. The first shade of deep blue appeared on the horizon. The stars timidly began to blink, one by one, like little lamps turning on, announcing that night was coming. Slowly, softly, with all its silence, its peace, its welcome, and William, looking at them, felt something even deeper, a connection, a certainty that, in some way that he could perhaps never explain, he was part of it all. From the sky, from the earth, of the wind, from history, of life, and more than ever, he understood that life was not, as he had believed for so long, a sequence of struggles and defeats. No, life was a gift. It always was. It always will be, and as night approached, bringing with it the sound of crickets, the brightness of the stars, the light chill of the dew, William remained there in the rocking chair, breathing, feeling, knowing deep in my chest with a certainty that no words could ever convey, that now everything was exactly where it should be, and that he, too, simply, too. Night, little by little, took over the sky. The deep blue spread slowly, like a silent blanket, welcoming each star that timidly began to appear. One by one, they lit up, flickering softly, as if they were whispering ancient secrets that only the silence of the night was capable of keeping. The wind, now colder, slid across the balcony, gently swaying the curtains, which danced slowly, lulled by that calm, constant, almost hypnotic rhythm. William remained in the rocking chair, his eyes turned to the sky, observing that silent, grand spectacle that life offered every day, and that, for so long, he had not even noticed. It was curious to think about it. For how many years have you been so busy, so immersed in worries, fears, bills, deadlines, that you simply failed to notice the beauties that were always there? The sunset, the sound of the wind, the smell of the grass after the rain, the brightness of the stars reflecting in the stream. All of this has always been there, but only now did he really see. He took a deep breath. Very deep, the fresh night air filled his lungs, bringing with it that good feeling, that mixture of peace, welcome, belonging, and as he let out the air, he felt his whole body relax even more. The shoulders, previously tense, carrying the invisible weight of years of struggle, were now loose, light, free. The jaw, previously clenched from constant worry, was now simply loose, relaxed. Even his thoughts, once racing, noisy, incessant, were now soft, spaced out, like slow clouds crossing a calm night sky. He looked again at the box on the table, where the 3 gold nuggets shone discreetly, reflecting the silver light of the moon that was beginning to rise in the sky. And once again he smiled. Not that smile of someone who has achieved something. Not that smile of someone who has finally won. But a different smile. A serene smile. A smile that is born not from victory, but from understanding. From the understanding that life is above all a journey, and that every step, every curve, every stone, every sunrise, every sunset, everything is part of this path. Everything has its time, its reason, its purpose, and even though the path sometimes seems long, difficult, tiring, the truth is that, in the end, everything fits together. It all makes sense. William closed his eyes for a few seconds. He let the wind touch his face, the sound of crickets, frogs in the distance, and the running stream filled his ears. And in that silence, in that almost trance-like state, he realized something even deeper. That true peace was not in things. It wasn't in gold. It wasn't in the solutions. I was simply being present, in breathing, in feeling, in allowing yourself to just seemed to no longer exist. There was no past. There was no future. There was only now. And now was perfect. Her hands rested on her legs, loose and relaxed. Her bare feet gently touched the wood of the porch, feeling the pleasant cold of the night that was beginning to take over everything. Up in the sky, the moon rose majestically, illuminating everything with that soft, silvery tone that made the world seem enchanted. The shadows of the trees fell across the pasture, dancing slowly, carried by the wind. The stars, now more numerous, shone, twinkling as if they were somehow smiling, and in that moment, William was absolutely certain that, yes, he was exactly where he was supposed to be, that everything, absolutely everything, always walked silently towards that moment, for that now, and as he let his eyes wander across the sky, he allowed himself a thought that he had never allowed himself before. I am at home, not just in the house made of wood, windows, walls, but in life, in existence, in the world, in the being itself. I'm home, he repeated mentally, like an internal whisper, like a prayer, like a silent affirmation that filled his entire chest, his entire mind, his entire soul. And in that moment, he felt something he had never felt before. A love so deep, so immense, so complete, that it seemed to expand beyond her body, beyond the porch, beyond the farm, beyond the hills, beyond the sky itself. A love for life, for the land, by nature, for the story, for the journey, by its very existence. And in that love, he found something that, until then, he thought was impossible. True freedom. Freedom to be, if it exists, to rest, to trust, of simply being. And as the night went on, slow, soft, full of silences that were not empty, but rather full of life, William remained there, in the rocking chair, breathing, feeling, living, knowing with every cell in my body, with every beat of my heart, that now everything was exactly as it should have always been, and that he, too, simply, too, the moon, now high in the sky, seemed to observe everything with that silent, serene gaze that only stars can have. It illuminated the hills, the fields, the old house, the barn, the fence, and there, sitting in the rocking chair, it also illuminated William, who remained motionless, breathing, simply existing. The wind was constant, sliding over the skin and through the hair, bringing that pleasant chill of the night in the countryside. But it wasn't an uncomfortable cold. It was, in fact, a hug. A hug from nature itself, from life itself, as if the entire universe were saying, it's all right now. You can relax, you can rest, you can just be. His eyes scanned the sky, where the stars shone brightly, like tiny dots of light embroidered on a dark, infinite, mysterious fabric. Each star seemed to tell a story, a memory, an ancient secret kept in the invisible threads of the universe. And William allowed himself to imagine that perhaps up there, way up there were also those who came before, his parents, his grandparents, his great-grandparents, all those who one day walked that same land, planted, harvested, fought, dreamed, lived. Maybe they were there, observing, smiling, proud. And in that thought, he felt his chest fill with a tenderness so deep, so sweet, so welcoming, that it seemed to literally warm every little bit of his being. Because in that moment, he understood, as he had never understood before, that he had never been alone. Never. Every tree, every stone, every grain of earth in that place carried the memory, the energy, the love of all who came before. And now, more than ever, he was a part of it. He was that. William took a deep breath, deeply feeling the fresh night air slowly enter his lungs, fill his chest, and as he let out, along with the air, any trace of fear, doubt, insecurity. He let go, and it became light, lighter than he had ever felt before. And as he let his thoughts drift gently, he realized how everything in life moves in cycles. The day you are born, the day you die, the seed that grows, the fruit that ripens, the leaf that falls, the smile, the tear, the fight, the victory. Everything, absolutely everything, is part of this flow, of this silent, constant, perfect movement, which is life itself. And at that moment, he also realized that for a long time he had resisted this flow. He believed he needed to fight against it, that he needed to control it, that he needed to force it. But now I knew there is nothing to control. Life, the path is already traced, and everything, absolutely everything, happens at the right time, the right way. He rocked the chair slowly, listening to the soft sound of the wood, creaking mixed with the sound of the wind, the crickets, the stream in the distance. It was like a symphony, a music composed not by instruments, but by the elements of nature themselves. The wind, the water, the leaves, the stars, the silence itself. Everything was part of that melody, and he, too, simply, too. He opened his eyes slowly, observing the field now silvered by the moonlight. Every leaf, every stone, every piece of wood shone softly, as if covered in a magic dust, invisible during the day, but which now revealed itself silently under the watchful gaze of the night. And as he watched, he allowed himself a thought. Maybe the real miracle was never the gold. Perhaps the real miracle has always been being alive, breathe, to feel, to perceive. It is allowed. And in that instant, something inside him expanded, an understanding so deep, so intense, so complete, that words would never be able to describe it. It was as if I could suddenly feel, physically, the connection to everything, with the earth, with the sky, with the stars, with the past, with the future, with the now. Everything, absolutely everything, was part of the same invisible fabric, the same breath of life, the same great mystery that is existence, and he was part of it. Always did. It always will. He closed his eyes again. He took a deep breath. He let the wind caress his face, like invisible hands, full of love, tenderness, care. He let the sound of the world lull him, soothe him, slowly lead him into a state of relaxation so deep, so absolute, that he seemed to become part of the silence itself. His muscles relaxed. His thoughts, once spaced out, were now just distant, soft, tranquil echoes that came and went, like waves in a calm, serene, untouchable lake. And in that state, he realized that he didn't need to do anything else. Nothing. Just exist. Just being. Just be. And so, in the deep silence of the night, lulled by the sound of the wind, the stream, the crickets, and by the peaceful beating of his own heart, William remained there, breathing, feeling, knowing with every fiber of his being that now everything was exactly where it should have always been, and that he, too, simply too. The night moved at its own pace, slowly, softly, as if each second was hand-woven carefully to create that invisible blanket of silence and peace that now covered everything. The sky was darker, deeper, more starry. Never, ever did William remember seeing so many stars, and maybe they were always there, just waiting for him to simply look. The wind was blowing colder now, but still it carried that light, cozy touch, like an invisible blanket made of smells, of sounds, of memory, of life. William remained in the rocking chair, his eyes, sometimes open, sometimes closed, wandered between the sky and his own thoughts. But they were different thoughts, not the ones that ran, that weighed, that tightened the chest. They were light thoughts, soft thoughts that seemed more like slow clouds crossing a calm, serene, peaceful night sky. And as he rocked slowly, listening to the soft sound of the wood creaking, he realized once again how it all made sense, all the time, even when it seemed like it wasn't, even when everything seemed like a struggle, even when everything seemed too heavy. All along, life was there, whispering, driving, silently weaving each thread, each detail, each curve of the path. And now, looking back, I saw that every challenge, every tear, every sleepless night, every doubt, every uncertainty, all of this was, in fact, part of a grand design, a drawing that only now, seen from afar, seen with a peaceful heart, he could understand, and he realized once again that life was never against him. Never. Life has always been by your side, taking care, protecting, preparing. Yes, preparing, because maybe for that miracle to happen, he needed first to learn to trust, learning to stay, learn not to give up, not because life wanted to test him, but because sometimes the miracle itself lives in the silent resistance of those who choose day after day not to give up. He looked again at the box on the table. table. The gold was there, glowing discreetly under the soft light of the moon. But at that moment, it didn't even seem that important anymore. Not in the material sense, not as wealth, but as a symbol, a silent reminder that, yes, good things happen, that yes, life can surprise, that yes, miracles do exist, and that they almost always happen in silence, at the right time, the right way, in the perfect way that life has of making everything, absolutely everything, fit together. William closed his eyes once more. He let the sound of the wind, the song of the crickets, the distant sound of water running in the stream, the smell of wood, of damp earth, of dew, completely fill every space of his being. He felt every muscle in his body relax even more. Each breath becomes slower, deeper, softer. Time now seemed to almost no longer exist. It was as if the world, time, reality itself, had been reduced to that exact moment, to the sound of the wind, to the smell of the night, in the light of the stars, to the silence full of life that filled every corner, every space, every thought. And in that state, William realized once again that he didn't need anything else. Nothing, just that. Just being. Just breathe. Just be. And in that immensity of silence, of peace, of presence, he felt perhaps like never before how good it was, how enough it was, how deeply liberating it was to simply exist. No rush, no fear, no charge, weightless, just exist. And as the chair slowly rocked, rocking his body, his thoughts, his very being, he realized that in that very moment, he already had it all because true wealth was never outside, never been in gold, never been into things. True wealth has always been there. No wind, in the silence, in the breath, in gratitude, in life, in simplicity, in the presence, and in that moment, surrounded by the most welcoming silence he had ever experienced. William allowed himself to simply rest, weightless, no fear, no past, no future, just in the now, in the perfect now, in the absolute now, in the now that is all there is. And as he breathed, slowly, deeply, softly, he felt once again that certainty that no words will ever be able to describe. It's all right now. Everything is exactly as it should always be, and me too. Time passed, but so smoothly, so imperceptibly, that it was almost as if the very concept of time had been dissolved that night. William breathed slowly, deeply, serenely. The sound of his own breathing mixed with the sound of the wind, the distant stream, the crickets, the frogs, and all that silence that, although so full of sounds, seemed more welcoming than any words, than any explanation. Looked at the sky, now even more starry. It was impressive how, as the night progressed, more stars seemed to appear, as if the universe generously had saved the most beautiful spectacle precisely for those who choose to stay. Each star twinkled softly, as if breathing, alive, present, looking at him, just as he looked at them, and in that moment he realized how much he was a part of all of this. It was not separate from the world. He was not a stranger to life. He was life. It was the wind that was blowing. It was the leaves that swayed. It was the smell of the earth. It was the sound of water running freely in the stream hidden between the rocks. It was every star that twinkled in the sky. Every ray of moonlight that gently touched the wood of the porch, the roof of the house, the field around. He simply was, and being now was enough. He didn't need to fight anymore. I didn't need to prove it anymore. I no longer needed to run, resist, grit my teeth, carry that invisible weight that for so long seemed obligatory. No, now he could simply wrest the gold, which lay silently in the wooden box on the table, shone discreetly under the moonlight. But at this point, it just seemed like another part of the scenery. Important, yes. A gift, a blessing, but it wasn't the center, because the real gift was in that moment, in the breath, in the silence, in the peace that took over the body, mind, soul. William physically felt every muscle in his body surrender a little more to rest. The shoulders increasingly loose. The hands, which had previously held the arm of the chair, now rested lightly on the legs. His bare feet felt the cold but comfortable touch of the wood on the porch. Breathing, slow, so soft, so deep, which seemed itself to be part of the wind, part of the sound of the night, part of the universe itself. And as he rocked slowly in that chair that so many times welcomed him in days of exhaustion, in days of worry, in days of sadness, now it welcomed him simply in peace. Total, complete, absolute. A peace so deep, so welcoming, so enveloping that it seemed like it didn't fit in the body. It expanded beyond the balcony, beyond the house, beyond the field, beyond the hills. It expanded to the entire sky, for every star, for every swaying branch, for every whispering leaf, for every little piece of life that silently was part of that great and mysterious fabric that is existence. And as he felt this, William allowed himself once again to simply smile, a light smile, subtle, almost invisible, but full of life, full of love, full of gratitude for everything, for the journey, for resistance, through the tears, for fears, for the uncertainties, for the difficult days, for the mornings that never seemed to dawn, for the dreams that seemed too far away, for the bills, for the worries, for the sleepless nights. Because now, looking at everything, I realized it all made sense. Everything has led here. Everything was absolutely perfect. And as the wind blew, and the sound of the night lulled him, and the stars twinkled, and the moon high above smiled, William felt his eyes begin to close, naturally, gently, effortless, as if one were simply allowing oneself Allow yourself to rest. Allow yourself to let go. Allow yourself to simply be, and in that moment, in that exact moment, surrounded by the sound of the wind, by the smell of the night, by the soft light of the moon, and by the silent presence of the stars, William knew with a certainty that no words in the world would be able to describe that everything was exactly where it should have always been, and he, too, the world followed its course, slowly, gently, without haste, without urgency. The sound of the wind, the sound of the leaves, the sound of the stream running between the rocks, of the crickets, of the frogs. Everything was part of a perfect symphony, designed almost like a whisper to cradle that moment, that now, that silence that was not empty, but rather full of life. William remained in the rocking chair, the eyes sometimes open, sometimes closing slowly, were like portals that alternated between the external world and the internal world, between the sky, the stars, the moon, and the memories, the feelings, the sensations that filled his chest, his mind, his being. And in that moment, he realized once again, with a clarity that bordered on the sacred, that life had always known. I always knew the way. I always knew the time. I always knew exactly when, how, and why the gold, which still shone softly in the wooden box on the table, was indeed a gift, a blessing, a surprise. But now, looking at it, I realized that the real treasure had always been there, always, in the small details, in the morning breeze, in the smell of wet earth, in the sound of rain hitting the roof, in the warmth of the sun coming through the window on winter mornings, in the hot coffee held between hands at sunset that paints the hills golden, in the comfortable silence of the night, in slow breathing, in the presence, not now, and now. It all made sense, all. William took a deep breath, very deep, feeling every cell in your body fill with that fresh, pure, clean air, full of life, of peace, of gratitude. And as he let out his breath, he felt once again that everything, absolutely everything, became lighter, softer, more peaceful. The body loose, the thoughts silent, the heart beating in a slow, calm rhythm, like a lullaby sung by nature itself. He looked once again at the sky, the stars shining, blinking, silent witnesses of eternity, witnesses to life, to history, to the path that he now understood to be much greater, much more beautiful, much more perfect than anything he had ever imagined. And as he looked, he allowed himself to smile, a light smile, quiet, a smile from someone who understands that there is nothing more to look for, that there is nothing more to prove, that there is no more rush, that there is no more urgency, that now what there is just that: presence, breathing, peace. And in that state of complete acceptance, of complete rest, slower and slower, deeper, more spaced out. The body, completely loose, surrendered, leaning on the chair, on the wind, on the silence, on life itself. And the mind, light, free, calm, no rush, weightless, no past, no future, just now. And now is perfect, simply perfect. The sound of the wind, so soft, so present, so constant, as if it were a song, a melody, an invisible massage that lulls, that warms, that protects, that envelops. And as the stars shine, as the moon watches, silent, as the world outside continues its own cycle, William allows himself to simply let go of everything. Drop the weight. Let the stories out. Let go of worries. Release doubts. Release tensions. Letting go, even of the need to understand, because now there's nothing more to understand. Now there's only what to feel. The silence, peace, the welcome, the presence. And in this space where time no longer matters, where thoughts are just distant clouds that come and go without haste, without pressure, in that space, William slowly, gently, silently falls asleep. A light sleep, a deep sleep. I'm calm, asleep, where there is no weight, where there is no fear, where there is no past, no future, where there is only peace. And while he sleeps, deeply, silently, the world goes on. The wind keeps blowing, the leaves keep swaying, the stars keep twinkling, the stream keeps running. Life just goes on. Perfect, silent, welcoming, generous, because in the end, life always knew. I always knew that when the time comes, when the moment comes, everything falls into place. It all makes sense. Everything goes back to its place. And now, everything, absolutely everything, is exactly where it should be. And William, too, simply